Hello, Rick here again, and today we're looking at the pre- and early Federation times, with this episode having a focus on the Klingon Empire and its opinion of humanity and the Federation. The Klingon Imperial Fleet was the collective name for the entire Klingon Empire's armada, and although a formidable amount of ships and firepower, they were in fact rather fractured around the time of the Federation's formation. It was not until much later on in the timeline, when Starfleet was pushing ever closer to their borders and the Klingons had had time to observe the assimilation of multiple cultures into the UFP, that the Empire unified in opposition to the Federation. The internal fracturing among the houses was generally due to the increase in warrior caste Klingons. Although in their earlier times the Klingon people had everything a society needed to grow steadily, in a time of easy conquest for them, they began to compete for honour through combat. Over the generations, younger Klingons followed the examples of those who came before, and as the populace slanted towards greater numbers of restless warriors, the obsession with glorious combat grew, with houses trying to outdo each other. Klingon ships of the 22nd century were hardy vessels that could achieve Warp 6 by the time of Earth's NX-01, but this had been a very slow development, as most sources claim that Klingons obtained their warp travel in the 10th century. So over 1,000 years of development only got them to Warp 6. Their vessels too had serious security concerns, caused by oversights and actual exploitable systems, something that would bite them in the buttleth several times in their history. Vulcans had tense relations with the Klingons ever since they destroyed the first Vulcan vessel to encounter them in the Hattorius system in 2016. In response, the Vulcans made sure to fire upon any encountered Klingon vessel. Soon, in pretty standard Klingon thinking, the Empire identified the Vulcans as more trouble than they were worth, or perhaps they even grew to begrudgingly respect them somewhat. Either way, the Klingon aggression against the Vulcans did not persist into the 22nd century, unless Vulcan ships violated their space. Nonetheless, the Klingons would continue to sneer at Vulcans and mock their logic, but never really attempt anything aggressive with them. Starfleet's first encounter with the Klingons was generally a positive one. Well, I mean, Klang was shot by a farmer. But not fatally, and he was treated at Starfleet Medical for his wounds, while being protected from the Suliban Cabal agents. While Klang was probably not too happy about the whole affair, the Enterprise NX-01 managed to successfully return him to Kronos on its first mission. This resulted in the completion of Klang's charge to deliver intel on the Suliban Cabal to the High Council concerning their attempted disruptions. This was but one of many pieces of a temporal Cold War that had been waging across multiple times, which is a whole nother confusing mess. The return of Klang, however, dishonoured the individual and showed the chief mistake humanity would continue to make time and time again when dealing with Klingons. Humans have their own concept of honour and apply those notions to Klingons, but the two are not one-to-one compatible. The Enterprise also technically violated Klingon space to travel to their home world, so the fact they were allowed to leave again was a restrained action by the Empire. Eventually, however, Earth's first Warp 5 vessel was marked as wanted by the Empire for a time, specifically Captain Archer, and attacked often by Klingons. However, these attacks were intermittent and varied in success, showing a lack of unified effort, again a symptom of the loosely organised nature of the Empire. There was no singular Klingon defence force to manage a coordinated operation to capture Archer. Eventually, Duras, son of Torol, was killed by the Enterprise crew, which would mark the beginning of a strong grudge against humans in general, from the House of Duras in particular. With the prominent number of humans in Starfleet, the Klingons would adopt the view that the Federation was basically a human organisation. This was a stereotypical view possessed by a number of other species, which persisted all the way into the 24th century. It was even mentioned in the pre-talks to the Khitomer Accords in 2293 by Chancellor Azedba. that humanity seemed oddly favoured for an organisation that claimed to preach equality. True or not, humanity, however, would go on to have a rather large influence in Klingon society, a completely unintentional one from both parties. In 2154, Dr. Arik Soong, obsessed with the augments of Earth's history, had stolen some of the embryos left over from the eugenics wars and grown them. These augments stole a Klingon bird of prey and killed the entire crew easily. This feat shook the Klingons more than they let on, as suddenly they had notions that this seemingly weak but meddlesome race of humans suddenly had super soldiers. The Klingons began to experiment with their own augment projects. Antak, a head scientist, obtained some of the embryos to use their DNA, but the initial experiments instead created a super Lividian flu that began to spread among the Klingon people, killing them. Trying to contain the situation and keep it a secret so as not to appear weak, a way of thinking that will continue for generations, the Klingons began to sterilize planets through orbital bombardment. Eventually, a cure was not found to the augment virus, but it could be rendered into a non-lethal strain which would still inject human augment-based DNA into the Klingon genome. This visibly dissolved a Klingon's cranial ridges, causing them to look more human in appearance. Afflicted Klingons often felt shamed at the appearance, despite not being treated that differently in their society, and the knowledge that they now contained human DNA in some form. As a result, the Klingons would evade talking about this topic with outsiders until the DNA was bred out of future generations and their original appearance was mostly restored. The Klingons had never been friendly with the Romulans, skirmishing frequently with their neighbouring empire and conducting raids along their border worlds. The Dralax incident in 2155 was a pivotal event in their relations as the Star Empire developed an intense program that could usurp Klingon security systems and take complete control of a vessel. Using this, the Romulans used Klingon vessels to attack the planet Dralax, which then had the coalition of planets thinking that there would be a coming wave of Klingon aggression. The Klingons managed to destroy this compromised vessel, but did not explain the situation to the coalition, again not wanting to reveal the exploit in their security. With no explanation forthcoming and Starfleet growing increasingly riled up by Romulan aggression, the coalition of planets was on the verge of declaring the Klingon Empire as another front in this war. Fortunately, Captain Archer uncovered the truth in private, and war with the Klingons was avoided, just as well as this would have weakened both sides, while the Romulans sat back and laughed, twirling their moustaches. As it was, when the Earth-Romulan War erupted in earnest, the Klingon Empire was content to sit back and watch their two rivals fight it out, for the most part. Captain Archer overestimated the amount of influence he had with the Klingons, so when an official request was sent out to them to ask for aid, the High Council easily turned Starfleet down. Despite this, a token wing of ships was sent to partake in the Battle of Cheron in 2160 to destroy a Romulan shipyard. This turned out to be the climactic battle of the war. When Andoria, Earth, Tellar and Vulcan united to form the United Federation of Planets in 2161, the Klingons became wary of this new power. For the most part, the two governments simply watched one another for decades. But the tension was continually building as the Federation expanded, inching closer to Klingon space. It's hard to point an exact start date to the Federation-Klingon Cold War, as several stories paint hostility erupting in 2218 and 2223. The latter date seems more likely, as Spock in 2293 mentions the end to 70 years of hostility between the Federation and Klingon Empire with the signing of the Khitmar Accords. As is apparent repeatedly in Klingon history, they are very defensive of their territory and aggressively raid beyond their borders. This has brought them into numerous skirmishes with almost every species at some point, but their lack of unity prevented them from being a true threat. On top of this, they placed very little faith in diplomacy and would refuse to divulge information willingly, even when it would alleviate conflict. After all, a warrior actively seeks out battle, don't they? Well, a smart one doesn't, but like I said, the disproportionate warrior caste was a problem as much for Klingons as their neighbours. All the actions Starfleet did in an attempt to aid the Klingon Empire were done from a position of little understanding of their culture, and the results often had the Klingons split on whether to be angry or grateful, and probably angry that they should be grateful, because it's shameful for a Klingon. So inevitably, war would occur numerous times between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, but there were also times of peace in the face of a common adversary that makes the Klingons a mixed bag when it comes to relations with the UFP. Thanks for watching this video on the early times of the Federation. I've got a couple of books incoming that cover more of this era, so hopefully I'll be able to bring you some more apocryphal content to flesh out this time period. If only we got seasons 5 to 7 of Enterprise. Until then, thanks again, I've been Rick, and until the next video, may you earn glory in combat, or something.